Welcome to the Good Faith Podcast. I'm your host, Curtis Chang, and the Good Faith Podcast is a production of Redeeming Babel, and it's where friends who follow Jesus help each other make sense of the world. And for my friend for this week is Chuck Mingo, returning back to the Good Faith Podcast. Chuck, welcome back.
Curtis, happy to be back. Always good to see you, and loved when I got a chance to hear you kind of share your perspective on what it looks like to be faithful in these changing times when you were in Ohio recently. So it was wonderful to see you.
It was. For the listeners, will remember perhaps that the podcast we did on anxiety and immigration, in the panel afterwards, Chuck was sitting right next to me, to my left, and that was really fun to be together in Ohio. And actually, our work in Ohio is why I'm so eager to talk with Chuck today. So Chuck is a teaching pastor at Crossroads Church, the largest church in Ohio. And he's also the founder, co-founder, I guess, of Undivided, which is a ministry that helps churches navigate controversies in race. And this is especially relevant to the work that Redeeming Babel is doing, because we are about to launch the After Party Project and a pilot rollout in Ohio. And so Chuck, being a leading pastor in Ohio, I thought would be a great conversation partner in leading up to this. And with Undivided, he also has great experience in helping churches navigate through controversial topics. And so, Chuck, the way I want to set up this conversation is really around the question, can political controversy actually serve the local church? Can it serve the local church rather than it being a problem? And here's how I would, why I really wanted to talk with you is because, the after party is targeting churches that have not staked their identity on one party or another. They have not gone all conservative or all progressive, all MAGA or all woke. They are being led by, and I think are populated primarily by people who either believe consciously or believe instinctively that the allegiance to Jesus as Lord of all of their lives transcends political allegiances. It doesn't mean you have to leave behind your political allegiance, but it's higher. It transcends it. So that's really our target audience. We're not trying to send the after party into a church that's already gone all in one way or another. We're looking for churches that actually are looking for a different way to actually be disciples in the area of politics. Now, even within that target audience, Chuck, I have found, sort of broadly speaking, there's kind of two immediate reactions when we present the idea of and prospect of the after party. So one, there are a good number of pastors that I met in Ohio on my last trip that are like, when can we get this? How soon? Because they are just ready. They're eager for it. They know they need some outside resource to help them disciple their folks. Then there's another group that's nervous. They're like, I'm not sure. I don't know. And really, they're not sure whether heading straight into political controversy actually is going to help them or make things worse. So, Chuck, I want to ask you to help us speak to that second group, that group of churches, church leaders, pastors who are like, I'm not sure. I know I've got this issue in my church. I know my church has political tension in it, but I've been managing it mostly by trying to avoid it. And I kind of wondering whether I should just keep doing that and whether something like the after party may make things worse. So Chuck, draw on your experience of bringing in, another controversial topic into their church on race. Like, how would you speak to that pastor who has that kind of reservation?
Yes. Well, first of all, as you know, I am a pastor of a church that hasn't gone all in on one extreme or another. And as a part of that teaching team, as part of that preaching cycle, and just being a part of that community, I can understand. So I think I would start with that nervous pastor by saying, I get it. I understand the tension. I understand the hesitation. I understand that avoidance many days feels like a wonderful strategy. And I would also say, what we know about our people and our call as ministers of the gospel is we are constantly invited into uncomfortable places to help other people be formed into the image and way of Jesus. And I think there's an opportunity missed if we don't lean into the most contentious issues of our time in some respects. And I don't mean in some respects that they're not the most contentious, they are, but we have to find a way to lean in for the sake of the formation of our people and the advancement of the good news of Jesus Christ in a culture where I think the Christian voice is needed in so many of these spaces. And to vacate those spaces is not optimal. I think for the flourishing of our society, but I also don't think it's I don't think it's best for the flourishing of the church. So I'm going to take a term that is not unique to me. My good friend Walter Kim at the North American at the National Association of Evangelicals,
Yeah.
he said it this way. He said he thinks the opportunity that we have is how do we promote a comprehensive gospel for our common life in complex times? How do we promote a comprehensive gospel for our common life in complex times? And that resonates with me. And I think that's the opportunity that even things like the after party and hopefully Undivided are inviting pastors into, is to have a better answer to that question.
But Chuck, I appreciate that. I especially appreciate the fact that you as a current pastor can identify with the hesitant. As a former pastor myself, I also can really identify with them. I mean, if I had to weigh in on every controversial topic that emerged throughout my tenure as a pastor, I would have said I can't. Every week I would be putting out a fire or responding to a fire. What would you say to that pastor that says, "Look, my job is to evangelize, to disciple, to heal up broken marriages, to strengthen families. Like if I have to expend my capital, my moral, social capital on controversies, I'm going to lose what I need to get to these other really pressing issues with people who are struggling with depression, anxiety, broken marriages, and so forth." So speak to that concern, Chuck.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, again, I can relate to that. Here's what I see is so here's what I would say. Then it's a matter of how you address it. I don't think you have a choice as to whether or not you address it. And so if you think about the only tool being the weekend sermon, then I think you're right. You're going to be putting out fires all the time, and people are going to have a very herky-jerky experience in your church. But if you step back from that and say, if I think about the whole life of my church, if I think about small groups, if I think about other spiritual formation opportunities, if I think about the ways that we engage our money outside of the church, the way that we engage people's time outside of the church, all of those become great gardens, if you will, for cultivating a Christian faith that can actually be about the comprehensive gospel in our common life in complex times. And so that's the thing I would say is it's sometimes stepping away from it, thinking about it just as I'm just going to preach about this and say, how do I form my people? And how do I give my people opportunities to put into action and application their faith in these areas?
Chuck, I love that. And this is your own approach, and Undivided really is, as I understand it, and I've actually experienced your curriculum, it's actually trying to move the conversation on these controversial topics away from Sunday morning and into small group, face-to-face communities where people know each other, are talking back and forth, because the Sunday morning service is actually not really well suited for dealing with controversial topics because it's one-way communication. There's no interaction. It's not really face-to-face. You're side to side with another person you may be thinking differently about. So you can't actually have a conversation. So this is what I love. And this is, again, what the after party has also adopted. We adopt the same methodology that you've done so in race, that Alpha has done so in evangelism, which is trying to actually bring these conversations into spaces that actually foster conversation, which is really not the Sunday morning. And this is the problem when, again, pastors think that their only tool in their toolkit is the Sunday morning's service. So I totally agree with that. Let me ask you this. Is there a case to be made that actually by dealing with these controversial topics, you're actually building some muscles and some both spiritual and relational muscles to actually help them deal with these other issues, like their marriages, like their emotional state, like their parenting and so forth? because I think that's my hope, is that actually the after party is about calling people to the lordship of Jesus in a particular realm of
Yes.
politics. But the same moves that you have to make to call people to leave behind other allegiances, false allegiances, to actually have a true, or highest allegiance to Jesus in politics, it's essentially the same move you have to make in all realms of life. Do you see that in your work with Undivided?
Totally, totally. And again, it goes back to what we've been saying. This is a discipleship opportunity. I think sometimes we hear it, this is a discipleship issue. This is a theology issue. It's a discipleship opportunity. It's a
Yeah.
theology opportunity. And I think we have to see it through that lens, because you're absolutely right. I'm thinking about this personally. Curtis, it may surprise you to know that even though I created an organization called Undivided, I've got some relationships that are unresolved in my own life. I
Amazing.
got
Really? That's
shocking.
I'm so glad I'm not in your boat.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Once I get it
No,
figured out
no,
like
that's
you,
right.
then I'll be fine. Right.
That's right.
And
We're
so
all
I'm
in the boat. We're all in that
constantly,
boat.
yeah.
Yeah.
And in fact, I was having a conversation with my mentor today. And one of the things he said to me is, you have to understand this work that you need to do within your own life, within your own team, within your own relationships
Mm,
is the work. And so
yeah.
I think that's the other thing I would say to pastors is, this isn't just an opportunity for your people. This is an opportunity for you as a leader. This is an opportunity for you to grow, for you to walk through and work through some of those aspects of leadership. It's funny because there's some pastors who are fine with controversy and they need to really learn how to slow down and be empathic. There are other pastors who hate controversy. That would be me. I'd be one of those pastors who actually need to learn how to cultivate more of a
Mm,
prophetic posture in their
yeah.
ministry. And so it's also an opportunity for us as pastors and leaders to be formed. And one of the things I know is true, God is using the life we are living to shape us spiritually.
Yeah.
He's not interested in using some life that doesn't exist. He's not interested in using us, finally getting that 5-year sabbatical and going off away and then we'll grow spiritually. God's work in our lives is going to happen in the nitty gritty details of, to your point, being married, raising kids, dealing in a politically polarized society. That's where God is going to work in our lives.
Yeah, and actually I think it seems like in a funny way, working on some of these spiritual muscles and relational muscles of discipleship in politics in some ways actually is almost can be a safer way than some of the issues that you actually are dealing with in your personal home life. And I'll give you the example of this. Is one of our sessions in the after party curriculum is trying to help people develop humility that comes through complexity. We want people to understand the complexity that's involved in politics, such that it leads us to be actually more humble and realize, wait, things are not so simple. Things are not so this way or that way,
Mm-hmm.
and that therefore they can actually have a little, maybe not change their political view, but actually
Mm-hmm.
have some more humility about how sure they are that they're right, and have some openness to the possibility that their political opponent may have something to offer. Well,
Mm.
if you've done marital counseling uh, in a marriage in which the couples are fighting, this is the exact move you have to make. You have to help each
Indeed.
side understand, wow, the thing you're fighting about has more complexity than just this sort of
Yes.
either or, one side or the other. And so, in some ways, if you can develop this muscle in this issue that's kind of really frankly out there,
Mm-hmm.
that's not these political issues that are, for most people, are not directly impinging on you,
Yes. Yes.
then that actually can help you build the muscles so that, hey, I can adapt, I can sort of apply these same muscles of complexity and humility
Mm-hmm.
to this unresolved conflict that I'm having with my wife on how we should, whatever,
Absolutely.
raise our kids or spend our money and so forth.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, have you seen that in racial reconciliation? Because your Undivided is so much about promoting racial reconciliation.
Correct.
Has
Mm-hmm.
racial reconciliation work? Have you seen that help people, uh, help them do reconciliation in other kinds of relationships?
I really, I have. And what I'm trying to think of an example that's maybe a relevant example. And the one that comes to mind is Ahmed Beakley, who's someone who went through our experience. And Ahmed is in an interracial marriage. And so he and his wife went through Undivided, and through that really had some great conversations with the people that they formed a group with. Well, when George Floyd was murdered, and when that whole experience happened, Ahmed found himself as a South American man who is, African, I guess you would call him African American in that sense, but South American. Yep. He actually was really wrestling with his community and the policing in his community, wondering how are they responding to this? What, I mean, he lives in a community that's predominantly white, and really said, hey, I need to do something about this. He felt disquieted for a long time, and he really felt prompted by God, he would say, to go and have a conversation with the police chief in his community. And through that conversation, Ahmed actually invited that police chief and the police force to do Undivided, to go on this journey of wrestling with these things together in community. And it was a powerful experience, Curtis. I got to facilitate that experience. And so what I saw in that experience was the way that the conversation around race actually was able to create an opportunity and a bridge for the police citizen conversations to happen. Now, granted, those were along racial lines, but it's a different dynamic. This same police force has actually gone back and said, hey, we want more of our police to go through this experience because it's been so helpful for them. And so I do see how, again, the work is the work. The skills are the skills, and they are transferable. And as we transfer them, it's an opportunity again for us to walk in the way of Jesus, of love, humility, understanding, grace, and truth.
Yeah, that's a beautiful example. And wow, what an opportunity, because somebody in your church, in that church, wanted to head into the controversy, actually ended up kind of blessing the whole community and the ministry of the churches in the world. That's a really wonderful opportunity. Yeah, it makes me think of just a number of other, as we're talking, a number of other skills and spiritual muscles we're trying to build in the after party, and how replicable it is. Another session that's making me think about this is we're trying to help people understand, how do you have true hope in politics, because people feel so hopeless and exhausted. And this is providing an opportunity to actually help people understand, wait a minute, what is the true nature of Christian hope? Is Christian hope that everything will just get better in my life and in my world? Or is Christian hope actually hope in Jesus's ultimate restoration of all things, which ultimately only comes in the final party, the wedding feast of the Lamb that comes.
Amen.
And so even that, I think, is a helpful elevation of people's spiritual horizon by using politics to actually say, wait, the immediate politics may or may not get better, but that's not ultimately where our hopes are. Again, speak from your experience of Undivided. How else in Undivided do you use race to actually elevate people in some sense above the immediate fears and expectations people have on race as a topic?
Correct. No, well, that's a powerful one. And I think particularly with race, the great example. So kind of two things we hold in tension as we talk about Undivided. One is the vision that we see at the end of Scripture. Revelations has this vision of, people of every language, tribe, nation, and tongue before the word of God, before the throne of God, every ethnos, right? So you see that.
That's what we describe as the after party. That's the after party.
Exactly. That's the after party. That's the real after party. Amen. And yet we live in the tension today that isn't fully realized. And I tell people this all the time, and when I have conversations about Undivided, we are not under any delusions that one day I'm going to get back on your podcast in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years and say, Curtis, remember when racism was an issue? Remember the days?
We solved it.
Great. We solved it. What do we want to go after next? That's not it. Yeah. But to your point around Christian hope, and, I've recently had a chance to go to Alabama and spend some time in Montgomery and Selma and Birmingham, kind of walking the footsteps of the civil rights movement. And I'll never forget a pastor, Derwin Gray, said this. He said, why is the civil rights movement not considered an American revival?
It absolutely is an American revival. Yeah.
It is an American revival. And so when I walked those footsteps and even got to spend time with some people who, in fact, I'll tell you this story. It's so powerful. I got to spend time with people who were there, for Bloody Sunday, who had the scars
Wow.
to prove it.
Wow.
Um, and one of the things that strikes me about every one of them is they hold, I believe, a true picture of Christian hope,
Mm.
which
Mm.
is not that it will all be solved
Yeah,
this side of heaven, but that we are called to have a resolve to
that's
see
right.
as much of heaven on earth as we can.
Yeah.
And they live in that wonderful tension of being able to forgive those who have hurt them
Yeah.
and not walk in bitterness, but also continue to advocate. I mean, one of them is right now advocating for more justice issues. She's like 80 years old and she's like
Wow.
getting us. She was trying to get us to go like, hey, you need to do this. You can do this thing. And so I think that's so true. And as I think about that picture of Christian hope, to your point, that doesn't just impact your ability to kind of trust that God's working in the midst of the racial dynamics in our country or the political dynamics in our country. But boy, that Christian hope is what, as a pastor, I hope we're elevating every time someone experiences a loss and grief. I mean,
That's exactly right.
that's the funeral message for the Christian,
That's right.
is the Christian
That's
hope.
right.
That's the wedding message. That's the patient and suffering message for the Christian, is that there is a ultimate hope. And we do live in this already and not yet nature of the kingdom, but thank God we get to pray every day, God, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And we can expect that in small ways we're moving toward that.
That's such a great example. Yes, exactly right. Because in the same way that people are tempted to pin their hopes on the immediate political outcome of an election or of some other candidate or something like that, uh, we make the same mistake in all other parts of our lives. We think we pin our hopes
Totally.
this health outcome. Well, this job will come through. My children will turn out awesome
Yeah.
and live a problem-free, suffering-free life. And then what
Mhm.
happens when those things don't come? They really test, wait a minute, perhaps your definition and practice of hope was flawed, was misplaced
Yeah.
on the immediate outcome versus the
Yeah.
ultimate outcome that Jesus promises to restore all things. Because as parents, as in our marriages, as friends, we're going to see all sorts of our lowercase hopes
Yes.
disappointed. Uh,
Amen.
and so therefore we need to actually re-anchor on the uppercase hope, which is the hope
Mhm.
of the after party, of the
Man.
wedding feast
And,
of the Lamb. So yeah, that's right.
and let me just say, I mean, when I hear you say that, let me just say again, speaking to that pastor who's anxious, to that pastor who's unsure, what we just talked about for the last couple minutes, I don't remember us mentioning a candidate.
That's right.
I don't, I don't remember us mentioning a law that was recently passed. I don't remember
That's
us
right.
mentioning any of that, right?
That's right.
But the conversation that we're having is for the purposes of forming Christians and
Yeah,
helping Christians live in the world publicly as
that's right.
people who demonstrate that hope and that love. And so I just would go back to that and say, there's an opportunity here. There's a leadership opportunity. There's a spiritual formation opportunity, a discipleship opportunity, and quite frankly, a witness opportunity, which we haven't talked about that a lot, but there's also a public witness opportunity for followers of Jesus
Yeah.
who learn how to engage in these difficult
Well,
conversations.
you gave the example of that witness to the local police department, right?
Well,
Like, what an
absolutely.
amazing
There you go.
example that
Hmm.
would be. All right, we're here
Hmm.
talking with Pastor Chuck Mingo about the question: can political controversy heading into it actually serve the local church? And we will be right back. Okay, we're back with Pastor Chuck Mingo talking about the question: can political controversy actually serve the local church? And we've been describing ways in which, if we can actually head into this controversy in the right way, in small group settings, for example, with curriculum that frames the conversation in the right way, that it actually can be a beautiful opportunity for discipleship and formation that applies not just to politics or to race, in the two topics that we deal with in our work, but really in our marriages, in our parenting, in our friendships, in our health, in our employment, all of it. The same questions of where do you place your hope? How do you have humility? All of these kinds of things, these same spiritual moves we have to make in politics and race, we have to make in other realms of our life as well. Okay, so that's the opportunity, Chuck. What is missed other than the opportunity? What are other um, downfalls or damages that occur when the church seeds the formation of our people on topics like politics and race? What's happening to our people if we as pastors and we as leaders of the church, we don't step in to actually form our people's spiritual and moral imaginations on these topics? What's happening to them?
Yeah, I mean, this is hard, and it's hard because we see it happening right now. And I think there's the word that comes to mind is malnourished. We have malnourished followers of Jesus. And I would put myself in that category because I'm not saying that I'm above this at all. But that malnourishment produces, well, here's what it doesn't produce. It doesn't produce the fruit of the Spirit. It doesn't produce, if you look at followers of Jesus and they aren't reflecting or experiencing more love, hope, joy, peace, patience, goodness, gentleness, kindness, self-control, then I think we see malnourishment has to be at the root of that, because the fruit doesn't reflect what the Spirit produces. And one of the things I know and believe is that the Spirit will produce good fruit, right? But there's another list that goes along with that comparison in Galatians. And it says, hey, if you're following this path, these are the evidences. And I think a lot of those things are what sadly we see becoming more predominant in our culture around, envy and slander and backbiting, all those things. And so I think the thing that is missed is the opportunity, quite frankly, for us as followers of Jesus to experience more of the fruit of the Spirit in these topics, in these areas of our life. And, one of the things that we really emphasize as a team, especially around this time of year, as we think about, giving and other things, is like there is joy to be had in the work of justice. There's joy. I mean, here's an example. I jokingly said to a friend of mine that every good movement has a soundtrack.
Okay. Yeah, I totally agree.
Again, I think it's true. And I'll go back to the civil rights movement and think about the spirituals that they drew strength from. In fact, one of the people that we were with and got to meet, her sister is responsible for the second verse, or whatever verse it is, of We Shall Overcome, the one that says, we are not afraid. We are not afraid today. It's possible to live a powerful life with Jesus, but not if we aren't really nourishing ourselves on the gifts of the Holy Spirit and applying them to the biggest challenges that we have. And so I think that's one of the things that's missed, is the malnourishment that does not lead to the fruit of the Spirit and actually produces the opposite. But the other thing, Curtis, and I have a conviction around this, I think we're at risk of losing a generation in the church.
Yeah.
I can't tell you the number of parents, grandparents who have said to me, my kids don't want anything to do with church. And on the surface, you could say, well, it's because, the church made a choice around how they want to think about human sexuality, or the church made a choice. I mean, you get all those things. But one of the things is, like, so many of them see the church silent, and they look at that and say, well, what is the church offering? And so I think the other thing that's missed is, I do think there's a missed opportunity. I mean, you and I probably share this in common, where we get to be in rooms where not everybody is, a Christian. And, And I you might imagine, be in some very progressive leaning rooms, and to be able to be a faithful witness to the gospel of Jesus in those rooms is a sacred gift. And I'm not telling you I've not been in any of those circles and had somebody pray the sinner's prayer with me yet, right? But I know, because I'm in relationship with people, that they're thinking differently about the way of Jesus, because I'm a living witness. And I love this. I'm not a perfect witness, but I'm a living witness. The world needs living witnesses in order to see who Jesus is and know how much he loves them, and how he has a way out of the things that feel like there is no way out in our lives, including our political lockjam that we're in.
Chuck, there's so much that you said there that I want to underline. So one of the things I want to pick up is the lost opportunity for our formation of our next generation. That if we do not step up our game in our churches in dealing with issues like politics and race, and reform our people better, reform our adults better, we are in danger of losing the next generation. I want to cite the really important book, The Great De-Churching, which had this very stark statistic in its interviews, which was very thorough and rigorous. It said 68% of de-churched evangelicals, 68% of de-churched evangelicals said that their parents played a role in their decision to de-church. Okay, how did their parents play this role? Here's what the number 5 leading factors. 1, their parents' emphasis on culture war lost me over time. That was the number 1 reason. Okay. 2, they saw in their parents precisely what you said, Chuck. They did not see the fruit of the Spirit. Lack of love, joy, and generosity were 3 things that they noticed. Number 3, their inability to listen, right? So their inability to recognize complexity and humility, their inability to listen. Related to that, number 4, their inability to engage other views, which is exactly what we're trying to do
Wow.
with
Wow.
Undivided and the After Party. And number 5, what lost these folks, this generation, was their parents' racial attitudes. That was number 5. Right?
Wow.
So we're
Wow.
seeing it happen already. If we do not actually address and reform how we actually disciple people on these topics, these controversial topics of politics and race, this trend is going to continue, and we're going to lose the next generation. So the other thing I want to pick up is your metaphor of malnourishment, that if we do not nourish our people on controversial topics, they will get malnourished. And the way I see this, it's not that they will starve, because that's not what malnourishment is. That's starvation.
That's right.
People won't starve. They will go feed on other food. And what malnourishment is, right, is when they feed on food that is actually harmful to them, that actually harms their spiritual health. And of course, and this is where we will see, like, if we don't provide an alternative view that is the Jesus-centered view on politics and race, they'll get that from the secular sources. They'll get that from some online source. They'll get that from social media. They'll get that from their particular political faction that is and dissension that grips their particular sort of social context, right? That will happen. And we see that. And I really think the thing I also want to underline is that we will know whether or not we're feeding our people with the right food by the fruits of the Spirit. And so, I'll just read some things that are the malnourished fruit of a unfed spirit from that, this Galatians, this is 5:19. It says, look, the acts of the flesh, which are in opposition to the fruit of the Spirit, right? In that list are discord, fits of rage, dissensions, and factions.
Yes.
Discord, rage, dissensions, and factions. I think that's a pretty accurate depiction of what we'd say is the political culture, not just of our broader society, but the political culture in our church as well. So that should be a clear warning sign. We can't keep going down this road. We are going down the road of malnourishment that is being revealed by the acts of the flesh, which is discord, rage, dissensions, and factions. And so clearly we need to shift up. We need to actually give.
We need to serve up better food.
We need to serve better food. And and we're not saying that, I think you would agree with me. We're not saying we're that either Undivided or the After Party is it. But it's it's an attempt. It's an attempt. It's like a first course.
Absolutely.
It's a first pass.
That's
like,
exactly
taste
right.
this and let's see if we can do better here.
That's exactly right. Wow.
All right. So
that's a clarion call.
It is. It's an important for all of us. For all of us. That's right. Chuck, I want to talk a little bit more practically. And so if let's say a pastor or a church leader is listening to this and it's like, okay, I guess I'm being persuaded, or I'm being open that I need to actually not go down the path of avoidance because it's leading to these acts of flesh. I'm open. I want to be open. What would you say needs to be in place first in a church if they are going to do something like Undivided or the After Party? Like, can anybody do this? Is any church ready to do this? Or does some groundwork need to be laid, or does some things need to be already going on?
Yeah. You know what, Curtis, it's a great question. And I think if you had asked me that even 3 months ago, I would have had a different answer. And it's not that answer isn't inclusive of what I'm going to say now, but here's what I'm 100% clear on. If I've ever been clear on anything, we have to give pastors and leaders a community of practice. We have to give them a community of practice. There needs to be a place where they're in regular relationship, preferably with people who obviously have different points of view, where there is a community where they are learning how to engage with each other. They're learning how to frame this in a biblical worldview. They're learning the skills of listening well. They're learning these skills together. And this community is committed to each other. Hey, we know this ultimately has to come outside of this community of practice, and you're going to have to do some things in your church. And when you do those things with your church, when you have that first conversation with your board, when you have that conversation with your staff, when you preach that message, but not just that message, when you do small group content around this, you're going to need a place to be supported because backlash will come. I think one of the things that we should make abundantly clear is if you go down this path, you will have backlash. There's no doubt about it. Not everybody's going to be on board no matter what you do.
Yeah.
And so I think that I'm more committed than ever to saying, how can we at Undivided, how can, the great work that you're doing with the after party be a place where pastors can have a community of practice, a safe place to really build the skills needed to lead in this new way.
Yeah. I also want to recommend the work of the Matthew 5-9 Fellowship.
Yes.
That I know you're a key partner. That
Absolutely.
we're
I'm a part of that.
partners in part of that together. They're a sponsor of the Good Faith podcast. They're a partner with the After Party, and they're trying to build exactly another version or a supplemental version of these kinds of communities. But I think we need more of them. I think we need as many as we can get. So that's a great word. What, Chuck, would you say from your experience would be some common mistakes that pastors make as they start saying, if they're saying, okay, I need to head down the path of engagement, I can't keep going down avoidance? What would be some common rookie mistakes that are made?
This I might have a little bit of fun with this. You can help me think about nicknames for these. Some of these come with nicknames. The first one is the one and done. The one and done, right? Okay. I posted the thing. I preached the one sermon. I preached my life's message on race. I did it 10 years ago. I'm not doing it again, right?
That's right.
So
it was so good it sticks. Yeah.
It was so good it sticks, right? I would say the one and done is a common rookie mistake. So again, you think about it as a diet, right? What's the way in which this actually gets into the fiber and the culture of your church and your people? So the one and done is one mistake. I think the other mistake I would say also is the surrogate. We'll call this one the surrogate. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to get Chuck Mingo to come to my church and preach a message on race. I'm going to get Curtis Shane to come to my church and talk about anxiety and politics. And that's going to be the way that we solve this. I think, again, there's a need for us who are pastors to shepherd our people through these things. It doesn't mean that you don't bring in a Curtis or a Chuck or, a million other people, Andy Hanauer. There's a lot of people we can name. But it does mean that can't be the only voice they hear on this. They need to hear the voices of their shepherd on this. And I hate to say it like that because it makes it, I mean, you know what I mean when I say that. Like there's
I think pause on this for a second, because I think this is where it's helpful to talk about some helpful, thoughtful, smart ways to do this, because we are saying, hey, it doesn't mean you do this from Sunday morning from a pulpit, right? And this is where I think the value of actually outside resources is helpful. You could actually bring outside resources into the small group context. This is the design of Undivided, design of Alpha, design of the After Party. There's a reason why all of us are doing it this way, because it's a way to bring in controversial topics that doesn't put all of the pressure on the pastor and have him go on Sunday morning with a big bullseye drawn around it. But I think what you're saying with the surrogate thing is, it doesn't mean you can just wipe your hands completely, because the key role of the pastor in that move, right, isn't it? They have to lend something of their social capital, their moral capital, their moral authority, so that people will trust this particular resource. They can't exempt themselves and say, if you want to, there's this thing out there for you to do. It's got to be, I really recommend this. And they can do it with plausible deniability. They can say things like, I don't agree with everything that Chuck says, but I think he's got some really helpful things, right? You could do the plausible deniability.
You totally can.
But you have to lend something of your credibility and your trust to get people to be willing to sample this different fear, right? Yeah.
Yes. I'll share one other, and this may not be a rookie mistake, but it's a watch out for all the pastors who are listening. I think the other mistake is believing you're alone and that the loudest voices in the room are the only voices in your church. One of the things that we talk about in Undivided is, how do you find the willing people who are thoughtful around this and who want to see a faithful path forward? And then how do you empower them in their leadership? You know, when we do Undivided, we say, hey, those are the people you want in your first cohort, right? People who can ultimately be facilitators of this in your context, because they not only can we teach them the Undivided DNA, but they have your church DNA, you know?
Right. Right.
And so I think that's the other thing I would say is, you know, pastors, leaders, you've got people in your organization, you've got people in your church who are primed for this, for whom this may actually be a calling, a part of something that God has laid on their heart. And how do you find those people and empower them to lead with you toward where it is that God is taking your church?
I think that's a great advice that I think I would really strongly suggest if you are a pastor and wanting to deal, and feed your people better, say on race or on politics, that a really smart strategy to consider is not doing this in one big immediate campaign, especially if you've done nothing on this topic before.
Correct.
That's going from 0 to 60, right? Then people are like, wait, what? Where is this coming from?
Yes.
Right. But
feels like whiplash, right?
It feels like whiplash and people get suspicious. But a really smart strategy is to find actually the people who you think are going to be your champions, the people who you think are going to be most open to your leadership on race, on politics, and so forth. And then actually gather them together in a small group for 6 weeks in the case of the after party. How many weeks is the Undivided?
7 weeks for Undivided. Yep.
7 weeks, right? So gather, gather your best champions, the people who are kind of have some credibility in the wider church, who are mature believers, who are respected, and then gather them together. And then you as a pastor, take them through for 6 weeks and 7 weeks. And at the end, then you've got some common language, common concepts, common vision, and some trust in this material that you've built together, and then use them as your champions to actually go out and then invite other small groups to go do this. So don't do the blitzkrieg campaign from up front. Again, especially if you've not touched this topic before, you'll freak your people out. Do it under the radar with your core possible champions, and then build from there. I think that's a great strategy. Okay, we've been talking with Chuck Mingo here on how political controversy can actually serve the local church. We're going to take a quick break and be right back. All right, we're back with Chuck Mingo in our final run here on this topic of how political controversy actually can serve the local church and the local church's work of discipleship. Chuck, we've been talking a lot about the lessons that people can draw that to apply in their own ministry, their own church context. I'm going to be a little selfish here, and I'm going to actually use you for my own personal advice here. So I'm going to shift the context a little bit from the local church to just running an organization, running a nonprofit, that's actually trying to get new content, inject new food, get new food, spiritual food out there, as we've talked about. I very much view you as an older brother who's been doing this longer. And so help me, what would you say? Hey, from the years of doing this, working on Undivided, here's what I've learned. Here's what I've learned to do and not to do. And hopefully, listeners, you'll overhear this and you'll glean from this examples, perhaps in your own work life, your own leadership of some sort. But I'm selfishly wanting to get tips from you on Redeeming Babel here. So give me your lessons.
Oh man. Well, if anything, maybe we're twins and I just was pulled out of the womb 5 minutes earlier than you. So I don't feel like I'm too far ahead on you on this, but I would say the first thing that comes to mind is, as a leader who, and this is for anybody, if you want to influence a church, an organization in this direction, whether you are a pastor or a lay person, whatever your role, care of your own soul has to be paramount.
Okay.
I mean, that's one of the things that I'm learning is that this work is wounding to the soul to some degree. And if I'm not aware of the ways in which, first of all, I bring wounding to the work, right? Because I had wounding before I ever started Undivided. And if I'm not aware of how that's impacting my leadership, It's a dangerous place to be. And so for me, what that's looked like is, I mentioned earlier having a spiritual mentor. I actually have someone that I do spiritual direction with regularly. I'm in,
Yeah.
community with people who know my life and who share the details of my life, because I know that it's so important for my soul to be in a place of health and wholeness as much as I can be to lead in this work. And I think that's true for all of us. I mean, I think it's true that unless you lived under a rock, unless you were Rip Van Winkle and somehow you fell asleep on December 31st, 2019, and you're just waking up today,
Yeah.
I think all of us have experienced PTSD. There's been a
Yeah.
level of challenge and trauma, if you will, that all
Yeah.
of us are operating from. And that's also
That's right.
playing out in our political
That's
discourse,
right.
if you want to even call it discourse. It's
Yeah.
actually rancor, feels like more than
Yeah.
discourse, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's that soul care piece that's so important. The other thing that I would say is it's so important, and it's oftentimes either more challenging than we think or actually easier than we think, to make sure that we are surrounding ourselves with voices of difference. That in my life, I'm living undivided. That if I look at the last 10 people I texted, if I look at the last 10 books I've read, are they all
Mm.
from one school of thought and stream of thinking? Or am I doing the work of spending time engaging with people who have a different point of view on this? Because there's a lot of people who have a different point of view, who love Jesus, read their Bible, know it better than me, that disagree with some of our approaches or some of the things that we're doing. And
Mm.
I want to be in a place of listening to them. That's a really important piece. Those are two things that I would say right off the bat that every individual can do. Every listener who's listening can think
Yeah.
about the ways in which you're caring for your soul and the ways in which you're allowing yourself to be open to different points of view. And let me say this, I tried to do the differing points of view thing on Twitter, or now X. That doesn't work for me. It may work for others, but it doesn't work for me. It makes me
Yeah.
angry and all of the things. I'm just
Yeah.
true confession. It's, for me, what works is relationship. Where there's a
Yeah.
context of real relationship, I can have those conversations across different. So I'm
Yeah.
just saying that
Face to
doesn't mean
face.
diversify.
Yeah.
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 Don't
Yeah.
diversify your
Face.
Twitter feed and think you've done the mission accomplished. I don't think that's going to help you.
Yeah, no, face-to-face embodied relationships of
Mhm.
difference. That was how my friendship with David French really began. Was,
Okay.
we were politically, not identical when we first started, and I
Yeah.
realized, wow, I'm learning so much just from being
Hmm.
friends with David, and that's really what blossomed our friendship. So I love that
Wow.
idea of cultivating difference, and I really want to
Yeah.
underline this idea of taking care of our own soul and
Mhm.
tending to our own woundedness. I think that's really
Yeah.
profound. It was true always in pastoral care.
Mhm.
Read Henry Nouwen's Wounded Healer, right? This
Exactly.
idea that
Exactly.
every act of healing is actually
Mhm.
involves
Mhm.
a healer who is wounded, and who in the
Yeah.
act of healing is also participating in their own
Yeah.
self-healing. But there needs to be a
Mhm.
conscious process, because if we're not aware of our own wounding, that will get worked out in ways that are potentially really damaging, where
It
we
will.
are unhelpfully working out our wounding,
Yes.
because we're not conscious of what actually is going on for us. And
Yeah.
then I think you're
Let me
right.
share. Let me share with you on that. I
Yeah,
want to share
yeah,
one of the things my
go for it.
mentor said to me just
Yeah.
today that was really eye opening about, again, the personal work that I need to do right now around this. He said the challenge with diversity work, and he was using that just as a general term. He said the challenge with unity and diversity work is it is incredibly hard, and the leader has to do it. And the
Mm,
leader doing that work means confronting their own woundedness. And he said it's hard because no leader wants to do that work.
that's right. That's right.
And yet, that's the work that leads to a healthy culture in a church when it comes to race, politics, and other difference, is when the
Yeah.
leader is doing the work. That's the
Yeah.
opportunity.
Well, I think that's right. And for all the pastors out there, I think they will have known, yes, I've been wounded by the divisions of politics and race.
Mhm.
And if you're a
Mhm.
pastor that's been like, and I'm just going into a shell, like I'm just trying to be
Yeah,
self-protective, and I'm just going to like turtle up on this, that's just turtling up with your wounds, right? That's when how
yeah,
wounds fester. And
yeah,
so part of the work of the leader in actually leading your people through these issues, I think you're right, is actually bring your own wounds in a vulnerable, appropriately
yeah.
vulnerable and
Yes.
self-revealing way to the right safe circles, right? In the right
Exactly.
safe
Exactly.
context, to say, hey, I'm coming into this just like everybody else. I'm wounded as well. And coming
Yeah.
in that posture rather than as the one with all the answers, or the one waving the finger. I think is the absolute right posture. What a great word, Chuck. Thank you so much. Chuck, finally, tell us what's happening with Undivided. What do you guys have coming out that our listeners should be aware of?
Yeah.
Yeah. Plug your
Yeah.
stuff, man.
All right. Absolutely. So two things that I think would be relevant first, and I was telling you this as we were coming on. Actually, I co-authored a book called Living Undivided, Loving Courageously for Racial Healing and Justice. And that book is coming out January 9th, 2024. I'm really excited about the project. And even the journey of writing that book has been a journey of kind of refining this in my own heart and soul, as well as my co-author, Troy Jackson. So for your listeners who are interested, you can go to undivided.us, undivided.us. And you'll find information there on how you can pre-order the book. It's going to be available, obviously, at all the local book houses that you have locally and digitally. But I'm excited about that. And the other thing I would say for your listeners, and this is true if you are a person in a church context or if you're a person in a secular context, we have an incredible suite of workshops that we've created. So as you know, we've done kind of our 7-week immersive experience, which we call our cohorts, but we've now created really some amazing workshops. And again, if you go to our website, you can find the listing of those. And, we're doing those in secular spaces and faith spaces and finding them to be incredibly effective. We have one that's on healing from racial trauma, helping people understand that woundedness and journey through that. How do you do that for other people? We have another one that we've done that's around the immigrant experience and helping people give context to that and elevating stories. We use a lot of creative arts in our work. And so we've got an incredible poet, two incredible poets and other people who are artists who are speaking about an experience that isn't Black nor white, but I think is increasingly important to bring in the Asian American experience, the Hispanic American experience, the indigenous experience. And so we're bringing those to bear. And so if any of your listeners are interested in and that we'd love to partner with organizations to bring some of that workshop experience into these contexts. We found it to be really impactful.
Those are such exciting resources. So listeners of Good Faith, really encourage you to check out the book, pre-order it, and it's available on Amazon, I assume. The title again,
Yes.
Chuck, repeat it, the title again.
It's Living Undivided, Loving Courageously for Racial Healing and Justice. Living Undivided. Oh, sorry. I think we're losing each other here.
Excellent. So go check that out. And then also the suite of resources that Undivided's produced. We'll put those in our show notes as well. They're doing such great work. It is such sort of closely aligned, like twin works of the after party. I know certainly we're going to be directing folks who go through the after party to help them think about taking the next step in their journey with Undivided. So Chuck, it's so great to be partnering with you in this work. Thank you for sharing that with us. And listeners, once again, next week, we will be gathering here on the Good Faith Podcast as we gather around the campfire.